Hello, I'm Bill Monroe, and welcome to 2-Minute Talk Tips. Today's tip, use some sort of timer. One of the things that airline pilots learn is to trust their instruments when they fly. Cloudy conditions combined with acceleration, changes in altitude, and various other motions of an aircraft can confuse the body's senses. The only way to actually know which way is up and which way is down, which by the way is very important information to have in the air, is to check the instruments. Speaking in front of a group is kind of like that, only with time. For some speakers, time feels like it speeds up, others feel it slow to a crawl. The important thing to know is that you can't trust your perception of time when speaking to a group. Use a clock or a timer. Most presentations have a time limit, and your audience is going to expect you to adhere to it. Yet judging time while speaking is very difficult. Looking at your watch isn't really an option because it means you have a radical shift in focus from looking at your audience to looking at your wrist. Pulling out your phone can be even a worse gesture that will also subconsciously inspire your audience to check their own watch or their own phones, which their mind will associate with boredom. Before you speak, make a note of a clock that's in the back of the room that you can easily see. If there's no clock in the back of the room, go ahead and pull out your phone in advance and search your favorite app store for a presenter's clock or a timer. Then you can place that on a table, a podium, or a lectern so that you can see it at a glance while you're speaking without diverting attention from your audience. If none of those are options, ask someone in the back of the room to keep time for you and to give you hand signals to tell you when you have 10 or 5 or 1 minute left. The key is don't trust your internal clock. Speaking is like being in a time warp. Trust your instruments. Stick around, and after the break, we are going to talk about how to prepare for a presentation. I rarely get nervous before I do a presentation, but when I do, it's most likely because I haven't done enough prep. I might not know my PowerPoint slides well, or I might not know my audience well, or I might just not know the material very well. And those are all shortcomings that I can prevent by taking the time to prepare. Now, we're going to talk about preparation at a pretty high level in this episode. We'll dive deeper into these specific areas and techniques and tools in future episodes. But for now, we're going to stay fairly high level. There are 3 key stages to preparing to deliver a presentation: early development, content construction, and, of course, practice. As we go through these areas, keep in mind I'm talking about a framework here. The actual details will vary widely based on your particular presentation, but the broad concepts will still apply. Just to set some context, for this particular discussion, I'm going to assume that I'm building a 30-minute training presentation that I will conduct in front of my customer's management team, and that I'm supporting my presentation with PowerPoint slides. I'm also going to assume that this is a fairly high-profile event and that I am one of several presenters the audience is listening to that day. As you go through the process and start building out a presentation, it's important to have some of that context in mind. Not necessarily the context that I'm building, but the specific context that you'll be speaking to, because that will inform a lot of the decisions you make as you get deeper in the process. So let's talk about the first stage, and that's early development. The first thing I want you to realize with early development is that there is no PowerPoint here. Do not use any PowerPoint. Do not open PowerPoint. Do not start it. Do not start with slides. Do not start sorting slides. That comes later. At this point, you want to focus on the presentation itself, and a PowerPoint deck is not a presentation. So in early development, you're most likely going to use a whiteboard or a legal pad or sticky notes. If you're a fan of OneNote or Evernote, those are great applications with blank pages. Mind mapping software can be really helpful, or even just a regular blank piece of copy machine paper. Those are the basic tools that you are going to start with. The other thing you need to consider in early development is, are you the subject matter expert? You'll often see that written out as an SME, or if you ever hear somebody refer to a SME, they're referring to a subject matter expert. The subject matter expert is the person who actually knows the content that you're going to be talking about. Ideally, you are the subject matter expert about the material you're going to present. If not, now is the time to find the subject matter expert and learn from them, or read up on the topic, or practice it if it's a process. You can't build an effective presentation until you know something about the material. And once you have a general understanding of the material and the context that that material lives in, then you can move on to developing the content. But you have to have at least a broad knowledge of all of this stuff you are about to present. Also at this stage, consider your audience. Who are they? How many of them are going to be there? And how much do they already know about the topic? Consider what else they care about, who else they are listening to that day, and understand their priorities. It's important to understand what your audience is doing, because the other things that they are doing that day are going to inform how well they respond to your presentation. It's also going to help you know what you need to say to them to engage them. Once you have a general idea about the material and the audience, now is when you can start thinking about the content. Start with, what do you want to say? You're going into this presentation, you're going to be conducting this session. Why? What do you want to accomplish? At the end of the presentation, what do you want the audience to do? What action are you calling on them to take? Think about why you're speaking to them at all. If you can't come up with a good reason to be talking to that audience, if you can't figure out what you want the audience to be able to do after the session, then it may make sense to just cancel the session, because there's no point. Make sure you understand what your point is, because then you can build things around that. At this point, it becomes important to start writing everything down and playing with ideas. You're not building things out in a formal way. You're just sort of putting your ideas and trivia and information and your points up on a board or on a piece of paper or on a piece of software. You just want to get all of that stuff out of just your head and onto some other place where you can see it, where you can remember it, and where you can start working with it. And once you have a good general idea about what you're trying to do, who you're trying to do it for, and what you're trying to talk about, now you can move on to the next step. As we move into stage 2, start with an outline. By this point, you've collected a lot of thoughts in a place. So we're going to start working on how to outline it and how to make that information make sense. The first step to building your outline is to take that idea you had from stage 1. What do you want to accomplish? And write it down. Put that on top of your board or top of a new page, and then start an outline. In general, your outline is going to include the topic headings and things you want to mention about each of those topics. The exact details, again, are going to vary based on your material, your goal, your audience. But in general, I suggest that an outline include, first of all, what your theme is. That goal that you want to accomplish. Just put that up right at the very top, because that's going to frame everything else that you do. Then you want to include an introduction where you talk about maybe who you are and why people should listen to you on this subject. Then a call to action. This is where you tell folks what you want them to be able to do after the session. Then your first main point, and under your main point number 1, the details about that, examples you want to call out, demos you want to do, other supporting information. Then move on to your second main point, which will also include its own details, examples, demos, etc. After you have your main points up there, put down your conclusion. Here you want to summarize what you've talked about, and again, leave the audience with that call to action. Now, it sounds like that's a fairly linear process and fairly straightforward, but it doesn't have to be. As you're building this out on your whiteboard or blank paper or wherever, leave space around those different points. When you leave space, you have room to add other thoughts, to cross things out, to make changes. Feel free to keep moving stuff around at this point. You don't have to leave it there. Feel free to change stuff if you don't think it works. This is one of the reasons I really like working with whiteboards for this process. Feel free, if you're working with sticky notes, to move them all over the board, to put them in a different order and see how the flow makes sense. This is in fact a process. And as you go through and as you develop your outline and understand the logic of what you're going to talk to folks about, you want to be able to move stuff around to make improvements. This is the time when it's easiest to do this. After you've gotten through your main outline, go through and look at that outline again. Look at each of the points that are in your outline and each of those subpoints. There are a couple abbreviations I like to consider at this point to help keep me on track. The first is WBTU. Why bring that up? You need to be able to look at each line on that outline and answer the question, why bring that up? Why are you talking about that? How does that support your main point? Another way to look at it is through a WIFM, W-I-I-F-M. WIFM stands for What's in it for me? Think about it from the audience's perspective. Why should they care about this point? If you can't answer why the audience should care, and if you can't answer why you're bringing that up, then delete that point. It has no relevance to your presentation and is not going to help you. So now, if you're like me, your whiteboard is probably a mess, and your outlines are probably all over the place, and your software has words all over the place, and you may have some sticky notes stuck to your shoulders by now. And that's okay, because again, this is a process, and we want you moving things around and drawing things and moving lines and getting it the way you want. So now is the point to go ahead and take a look at that and go to a blank spot on your board, a blank page in your software, and actually write out your formal outline based on all those changes and all of that brainstorming and all that process you've already done. Now that you have this outline written out, go through it again. Does it still support your theme or goal? Because one of the things that often happens is as we go through this process, we may drift away from our key theme or key goal as we start talking about or thinking about stuff that we're passionate about and that we believe in and that we think are really cool. Does this outline still make sense? Does it still support that theme or goal? If yes, fantastic. If not, either change your outline or change your theme or goal. Next, now that you have your outline complete, stop and think, do others need to review your content? In many business contexts or corporate contexts, someone else might need to look at your content before the presentation. Maybe that's a colleague, maybe that's a subject matter expert you consulted earlier, maybe it's your boss, maybe you just want to go ahead and run it by somebody to make sure that you're still on the same page and that what makes sense to you is going to make sense to everybody else. This is a great time to go ahead and get that review done. Circulate your outline to get preliminary approval from anyone who needs to provide that preliminary approval, because it's going to be easier and a lot less time consuming to make changes. So now that we've gotten your outline done, we've gotten your approvals done, and you're ready to move forward, now and only now is when you should fire up PowerPoint or fire up Keynote or whatever other presentation software you're going to be using. There are a lot of considerations in using these tools, and we're going to explore those in future episodes. But now you can use your outline to assemble your slides. With your solid outline, that will tell you where you have your section breaks, your title slides, your content lists, your supporting materials, what videos you need to include, what pictures you need to include, all of that stuff because you already have that outline done. Building slides is a lot easier when you're simply expanding on your outline. Many people skip the previous steps, skip all of this preliminary work. And if you do skip them, you find you build a much less effective PowerPoint deck. So now that you have your outline, now is the time to go ahead and start building your slides. And finally, that takes us to stage 3. And stage 3 is perhaps the simplest to describe, but is the one that may require the most work. And that's practice. First, study those slides that you prepared. You need to know your material and know your slides inside and out. If a slide, review it again against that WBTU standard. If a slide doesn't meet that standard, if it doesn't support your goal, cut it. Become familiar enough with your slides so that you don't need to look at the slide to know what's on it. Also, be familiar enough with your slides so that you always know what slide is coming up next in your deck. This way, you never have to turn your back on the audience during a session. Know your slides. It also means that if for some reason a session is running long and you need to cut stuff, you can make those cuts in your head while you're speaking and know which ones to make and which ones to skip. And now, of course, practice your presentation. Don't go through it in your head while driving to work. That may help you know your slides, but that is not actually practice. Stand up and say it out loud in your office or in a conference room or at home or in front of a mirror, and do that while you actually click through your slideshow. Even better is to do it in the actual room that you'll be presenting in. Maybe that means getting into that room the night before. Maybe that means reserving the conference room at your office for some practice time. Actually get up there, stand up and practice with the gear, the projector, the remotes that you will be using during your session if it is at all possible. This is an opportunity to discover things that might not work or to discover things that sound a little weird. To hear it out loud and realize, no, that flow doesn't actually work as well out loud as it did in my head when I was building that presentation. You want to find this out before your session begins, not in the middle of your session. As you can see, building a 30-minute presentation could take hours or even days of preparation. The better and more effective your preparation, the better your presentation will be. Exactly how much time you dedicate to prep will vary based on a lot of things, including how well you know the material, the audience, the slides, and the venue. It will vary based on how important the presentation is to you, how important it is to your boss, and how important it is to your company. It'll vary based on the audience and how senior the attendees are in their role in their organizations, how much various organizations are spending in payroll to have their people attend the presentation, and much, much more. Preparation and practice are critical to successful presentations. The better prepared you are, the more effective and the less nervous you'll be as you speak. There's a lot of stuff in this preparation process. If you don't feel you can do it all at once, just try starting with a few of the elements and get a little better each and every time. And if you have any questions or comments, please send them to me at bill@2minutetalktips.com, or you can post them on the website at 2minutetalktips.com. You can also call our listener line and leave a voicemail at 650-TALK-TIP. That's 650-825-5847. And I may use your message in a future episode. Until next week, keep an eye on that clock and make sure to prep for your next presentation.